Like normal. Ow. No! You're going to bully me, aren't you? Why not? Why not? Why not? Why not? Let's go. No. Hey, kid, I'm going out in the pocket. Walk it with the money shot. Come on. Sorry. Let's go. Yeah, I took my own shoe off to that shot. I don't even know how I got that shoe off that shot. Okay, when you jump that first. What do you have? Yeah, let's go. Oh, you were so close. You shoved your foot right. I'm not even gonna trick or treat. Yeah, we could show them sight on all the time. It makes me gain weight. Yeah. Right when I move your hand. I don't want to magically see I'm like, oh, what the heck? I hit it so lightly. I'm so sad. You gotta love the dead one. I got siblings. I mean, I got sisters. Oh, I got okay.
Oh, yes! No, no, no.
Damn it! Just shot! Please. Stop. Stop. Okay. Oh.
Abby.
I've seen Cuneo.
No,
Oh,
you
you
have
go. Oh.
now it's your turn. Now you have it. Okay.
Whoa.
Wait, who went after now?
Okay, so bring him back. Bring him back.
You go. He's got escorted out of
Okay, so you're after Caleb.
Yeah.
What did that say?
What did I do? Is that what it was? I'm going. I'm not going to do it. You gotta go.
That's what you. I started off getting Oh, wait. Is he?
That's why it's good. That was only two shit. Oh! Holy! I did. Stop playing another game. Focus on the one game you're playing right now. Oh, oh, snap. It's gonna be easier. Hashtag hard. Oh, I guess. Big old. Oh,
Great question.
I'll send that to my sister. And then my sister. Oh, God. Oh! What's that? Hey, hey. Whoa. I'm scared. I'm scared. I can see you. Alright, everybody go find the seat. Okay. That was weird. Wait, how do you lunch? Okay. Ugh. Yeah. Oh yeah. They made a mistake.
Was afraid of
That ball gonna be
I'll just sit right here. I have no sleep.
Not enough chairs for the boys. They're taking over. No. Can
I
the
girls
boys sit down?
But I didn't see that person. Maybe. But it was like big. It's good. It's fine.
I have to do one. It's not yellow. I'm not sure. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Wow, we've got a big group. That's awesome. There's like 4 people last service. This is so cool. All right, I'm going to open us in prayer and we'll get started. Lord God, thank you so much for each person you brought here this morning. Thank you that we can come here and worship you and just give you praise, God. We just take this time to truly just meditate on you. We just ask that we would feel your Holy Spirit and here with us and we feel your presence and that we would just not be distracted by anything around us or even in our own minds, but we would just give all of our focus on you and to you. We just love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Pour out your spirit, Lord. Pour out your spirit, Lord. I wanna be like Jesus. I wanna be like Jesus. Pour out your spirit, Lord. Pour out your spirit, Lord. I wanna be like Jesus. I wanna be like Jesus. King of glory, Lord of all. Your face I seek, your name I call. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. You are holy, you are pure. Your love is great, and your mercy endures. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I choose to honor you. I choose to honor you. I wanna be your servant. I wanna be your servant. I choose to honor you. I choose to honor you, God. I wanna be your servant. I wanna be your servant. King of glory, Lord of all, your face I seek, your name I call. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. You are holy, you are pure, your love is great, and your mercy endures. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And so I give my life a sacrifice of praise. Father, take my heart, take every part today. Sing that again. And so I give my life a sacrifice of praise. Father, take my heart, take every part today. King of glory, King of glory, Lord of all, your face I seek, your name I call. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. You are holy, you are pure, your love is great, and your mercy endures. Jesus, 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 Jesus. When you speak, confusion fades, in just a word, and suddenly I'm not afraid, 'cause you speak, and freedom reigns, and there is hope in every single word you say. I don't wanna miss one word you speak, 'cause everything you say is life to me. I don't wanna miss one word you speak, so quiet my heart, I'm listening. When sorrows roll and troubles rage, you whisper peace. When I don't have the words to say, I lose hope. When storms won't break, you keep your word. Oh, and your promises will keep me safe. I don't wanna miss one word you speak, 'cause everything you say is life to me. I don't wanna miss one word you speak, so quiet my heart, I'm listening. Your ways are higher, you know just what I need. I trust you, Jesus. You see what I cannot see. Your ways are higher, you know just what I need. I trust you, Jesus. You see what I cannot see. I don't wanna miss one word you speak, 'cause everything you say is life to me. I don't wanna miss one word you speak, so quiet my heart, I'm listening. So quiet my heart, I'm listening. Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. die, and I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still I fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves at 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. God, you are so good to us, Lord. And I ask that you continue to bless this time as we get into your word. And as always, Lord, please continue to speak through Daniel as he teaches. We just ask that we'd honor you in all that we do. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Lexi.
Thank you.
All right, guys, if you do not have a Bible yet, time to get one off the shelf. Nate, can you get one? Got out. I can't. I'm going to take your pad up now. Whoa. Okay.
That's already happened.
Yes, I know. I just haven't changed
Jaden's in this face right here. No, that's yeah. Whenever that pops up, Jane will probably scream.
Okay, I got the date. You're good at that.
Yeah.
All right.
Jen, where did you find that?
Lexi, can you turn on switches 1, 3, and 4?
And don't get shocked.
Also that.
My red nuts.
Your retinas? All right, then. Today we're going to be in Genesis chapters 9 and 10. Who was here last week?
No.
Big.
Does anyone remember what happened last week in chapter 7 and 8? Yes?
Something about Noah's Ark.
That's very good. Anyone else? Yes.
The raven and dove.
Raven and doves. Okay, anyone else? We're getting hints and clues here. You were here first service, so your memory of last week may be altered by the review we've done. The water went bye-bye. Yes.
They shoved the ark off the mountain.
They shoved it off the mountain? No, we kind of made that
No.
part up.
No, they didn't shove it
That
off.
part up.
They yeeted it off.
Yes.
It was about the flood and then how, like, I wasn't here last week, but I know Genesis, so.
It works. If you know Genesis, I can
And-
fault you for that.
And so, and like, then he sent the doves out to see if it brings back, like, a leaf, to see if the water's receded.
Cool beans. Anyone else? Any other things you recall? No? Okay. Last week there was mention of a covenant, and this week we get to see exactly how that goes down. Does anyone know what a
The
covenant
rainbow.
is? What is a covenant? Yes.
Promise.
A promise? Anyone
Yeah,
else?
be broken.
You're not wrong. There's more to it. Anything else you can add? Yeah?
Contract.
It's like a contract and a promise combined.
Lawyer.
Yes, very good. Okay. So today we're going to start out with that covenant. All the way down here. Caleb, you want to read me verses 1 through 4? You can read it on your Bible or on the screen. There. You should read the same. Your choice.
Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and all the animals of the all the animals, all the birds of the sky, all the small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the fish in the sea will look on you with fear and terror. I have placed them in your power. I have given them to your food.
To you.
You, just as I have given grain and vegetables. But you must never eat any meat that still has a life in it."
Okay. So this is how it starts out. With a ding from a phone. That's how it starts out.
Whose phone is that?
I don't know. Probably Jedi's. Should I put that on silent? Okay, there we go. All right, so first things first, God says, command. Go and fill the earth. That's his command. Then he says this other thing. He basically gives him a gift. He says, all the animals are for you guys. You're in charge of them, and I've given them to you for food. Now, why does he go out of the way to say this? Isn't that just like common knowledge animals are for food? Yeah.
Because he was tired of babysitting all the animals.
No, not quite.
No, that's for
Does anyone remember when we started Genesis, something you learned in like the first few chapters? Yeah.
Wasn't it that they didn't eat meat?
Yeah. In the beginning, when God created the animals and the earth and the plants and the people, everyone was a vegetarian, even the animals.
Everyone was vegan.
Actually, eggs and cheese don't get mentioned, so you could go either way on that one. They don't get mentioned. So yeah, I don't know. Could be vegan, could be vegetarian.
And milk.
That's a great question. I can't answer.
Or milk.
Eventually, they figured it out. Okay, so he says, now though, I've given them to you. They're yours for the taking. Eat them. Go ahead. However, he puts a rule on it. He says you must never eat anything with the lifeblood in it. So I got a question for you. Has anyone here ever eaten raw meat?
Yeah.
Sushi.
Sushi! Love the
Oh,
sushi.
yeah, sushi.
Big fan of sushi. Okay. Now, even if you've eaten raw meat and it's not fish, like let's say it's steak tartare or something like that,
Liver.
or you're just weird and you went to the store and bought a steak and ate it without the cooking.
That's vegan.
Even that doesn't have the amount of blood in it that it would have had. When a butcher does what a butcher does, and I know that might not be pretty to think about the picture in your head, one of the first things they have to do is drain blood from the animal so that when you buy your steak, it's not like drippy. Your meat has already been drained. The blood's been taken out. Now it's still red. There's still a bit of blood left over, but when you cook it, it turns gray or whatever. That's all fine and dandy.
That's yummy.
However, God is doing two things here. Two things here. He's not just trying to keep you from being grossed out. Okay? Like meat shouldn't have blood in it. Fine. Okay. So we know now what Noah and his sons didn't know then. God knew, but they didn't know. bacteria and microorganisms are living inside of all of us all of the time, including the animals we would like to eat. And when you kill the organism, like the cow, the little things inside of it don't necessarily die. And in fact, once the immune system shuts off, the little things inside of it get to go kind of crazy and do whatever they want. And so if you don't properly cook your meat, which kills all those microorganisms, you're going to have a problem. If you don't drain it of its blood, you're going to have a problem. You're keeping all the bacteria and then eating it. That's not good for you to eat. So when you cook it, it kills all those things. This is actually why they have like the little recommended temperatures for meat and stuff. You write a cookbook, like cook your beef to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Because we figured out, once you get to 165, there ain't nothing living in that meat anymore. It's all dead. It's very much dead. So we've got some science, we've got some logic now. God gave it to them just as a command. Just don't do that, guys. It's not going to be good for you. But there's a second thing going on here. And you can tell if you keep reading the chapter that there's actually a string, a theme going through all of these verses. And it starts right here with a respect for life, even the life of an animal. In God's scripture, we keep seeing things like blood, other things too, that have a symbolic meaning attached to them. So it's not just real blood. It's not just the red stuff that moves the oxygen and the nutrients and all that stuff around your body. It's also a symbol of life itself. That your blood symbolizes life is something God put there in the Bible and taught to the very first people, and he's reaffirming it here with Noah and Noah's family. And it's the same today. It hasn't changed. God's symbol for life is blood. And it's a pretty good symbol, because if, you lost all your blood, you would lose your life too. So the ability to equate life and blood is not that hard. That's pretty simple for us. That makes sense. And so what's interesting here is, by doing this, you don't get to, catch a rabbit, throw it in a pot, and cook it for soup. You actually have to go through like a process that's not so fun, it's not so pretty, it's not so enjoyable before you can eat that. And what it does is it makes you realize that to eat that meat, you're ending something's life. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, when you go get a burger at a restaurant, you don't really think about that. You're not like, yep, that cow who was raised by its mother, lived a long life out in the field, eating grass, has died so that I can eat this burger. Usually your thought process doesn't go there. And so there's no sacredness in your meal. There's no respect for the cow that you've eaten. It's just meat. In our culture, most of that load of having to actually deal with the weight of life has been pushed off to a butcher. The butcher has to do that every day, or we do not. Even when we go to the store and we buy a steak and it looks red, that's not as bloody as that cow was. That's not as bad as it was when the butcher was doing his job. Our steak is much cleaner and nicer now than what he had to go through. Yeah.
What about if you go into McDonald's and it's like fake?
McDonald's has real beef,
Yeah, but I think it has some fake stuff.
but it also has beef. There was a cow involved in the process.
Well, yeah.
Actually, no, they made a quarter pounder with no actual meat.
I mean, they have them now, but they're actually telling you that they're fake, like the Impossible Whopper and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, they're not hiding it. They want you to. All right, so the point is not to over-respect animals. The point is not to over-respect animals and lift animals up to such a high level where we're like afraid to hurt them, afraid to kill them, afraid to, don't eat a burger, it's animal cruelty. That's not the point. The point is that you would gain a respect for life in every single day's actions. That every single day as you eat meat, you would have a renewed respect for life, for something that God created. And this rolls into the next thing that God issues down to his people. All right, Cameron, can you read us 5 through 7?
Gotcha. And I will require the blood of anyone who takes another person's life. If a wild animal kills a person, it must die. And anyone who murders a fellow human must die. If anyone takes a human life, that person's life will also be taken by human hands. For God made human beings in his own image. Now be fruitful and multiply and repopulate the earth.
Notice he gives the same command he started with at the end. It's like God gives his whole speech to Noah and his family, and he starts with, be fruitful and multiply, and then he finishes with, be fruitful and multiply. And so all the stuff in between is to make that more possible. He's giving them instructions, commands, and ideas that will help them in the goal he's given them. The goal is be fruitful, multiply. There's only 8 humans left. If you don't actually try, you could all die out. If you don't actually start farming and collecting food and hunting animals and like make an effort of this, there's only 8 of you. You could just go extinct. So he's giving them the command and then he's giving them some tips. Yes?
So, if, like, so this is technically saying, like, people that murder people nowadays should die.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so check out how God weights this. He says if an animal kills a person, then it should die. And if a person murders, not kills, then that person should die. Notice the difference there. So an animal could just kill, a human would have to murder. Does anyone know the difference between kill and murder? There is actually a difference, yeah?
Kill is more like, it can usually be accidental.
It could be
or,
accident,
like, yeah. Or like maybe possibly out of defense.
Okay, sure.
But murder is like on purpose. Like you planned it.
Yeah. That is essentially the difference. Killing is the action that you are doing, but it could be purely accidental, it could be intentional. Killing could be murder. Murder is always killing. But sometimes killing isn't murder. Like, you're just chopping onions, turn around to put the knife in the sink and stab. Total accident, right? They still died. But you didn't mean to do that. You were going to wash a knife. Like, you're just trying to get rid of the tears from your eyes from the onion chopping, and now you have more tears in your eyes. Like, this was not intentional. So that's just killing. God's not saying an accidental death, you're like driving your car at night and it's raining and someone walks out in the road and you kill them. He's not saying you need to die for that. He's saying that's still bad. But for some reason, an animal should be put to death if it kills a person. Isn't that interesting? The punishment for them is the same, but it's for a lesser crime. That has to do with what murder is. Murder is the intentional killing of someone out of hatred. You're intentionally killing them out of hatred. When you do that, you are expressing a human emotion that an animal is not capable of. An animal cannot hate you. It can't. It can react poorly to you. It can dislike you in the sense of it has bad memories with you, but it can't hate you. Hatred is a decision. Animals are instinctual. Yes, but it doesn't do that because it hates you. It does that because it's hungry. And you taste good.
That means
Oh,
they
he finds
love
out when he
me.
eats you.
They love me. That means they love me.
The first bite is to find out. The other bites are because you tasted good.
That means they love me.
It's an interesting way to put it. Like the way I love chickens.
You kill them.
Sauteed in the pan.
And bacon.
So the animal can be guilty just from its actions. Why? Because it can't be guilty for its motives. It doesn't have any. But the human is guilty when its motives are wrong, not when its actions were wrong. And on top of that, when you kill someone, it's still bad for that person. But you didn't do something wrong if you just slipped, if you didn't see them, if it was an accident. You were trying to hurt them. They still suffered for it, but you didn't do something intentionally wrong. So God's not putting the punishment on the person who commits an accident. Oops, my skateboard slipped, which knocked over the chair, which landed on the cat that jumped out the window and onto you, and you fell and had a concussion and died. Like, how could you possibly have known? You had no idea this was going to happen. All right, so all of that to say, God's trying to impress upon them the importance of life, and he's also doing this, guys, follow me on this, he's issuing a command that he'll later reissue, the death sentence for a murderer. He's going to reissue that chapters and books later when there is a government. He's issuing it now when there is no government. There are 8 humans. That's it. That's not a government, that's a family.
No,
There are 8
birds
humans,
work for the
and he's issuing the commands, you shall put a murderer to death. Now that's wild to think about, that you could go to a family and say, here's the rule. But follow, what's the point of all this? to be fruitful, multiply, and be populate the earth. And so what God's saying is if someone is against that mission enough that they are willing to kill a person intentionally, take them out of the family. Because remember, when someone dies, they don't cease to exist. Okay, so the murdered person, the person who died because of the murder, they didn't just like poof into nothingness, right? They stopped being on the earth. They started being where God puts them, right? So either they've been sentenced to hell, or they've been taken to what would later be called like Abraham's bosom, the waiting place for Jesus dying on the cross. Before Jesus. But this is all before Jesus. We're in the first book of the Bible, way before Jesus. So before he was on earth, okay? So when you get murdered, you're not just like deleted, right? Your life here on this earth is over, but you are still existent. You still exist. So likewise, when you put a murderer to death, when the murderer gets the death penalty, they are not being deleted. They're actually getting a fair punishment. Later in the Bible, as God goes through, he starts handing out more and more punishments for more and more crimes, right? He says, you steal a $30 cow and you get caught, you owe
$40.
not 70,
What's that?
not 60, not 50, not 40, you owe $30.
What's that?
You steal a $30 cow, you owe $30.
That's tasty.
That's not complex.
Why don't you just buy it?
It's not like you're supposed to get double punishment to really drive it home that you're bad. It's that you undo the wrong you've done. Now, this is tricky. When you murder someone, how do you undo the wrong you've done?
You go to jail for 15 years.
Yeah, that totally undoes the murder.
You make him alive again.
Right. You have to be in charge of bringing them back to life. That seems fair.
And if you don't,
Your
you die.
punishment is to do the impossible. That's not going to work. No, God's saying, you take life, the proper punishment is for your life to be taken. You ended their life outside of what God would have had happen for them. Their original plan, God's plan for their life, all that could have happened was however many years long. And you said, no, I don't care what God wants. I'm going to cut it off here. And then the punishment is, okay, so now your life
But what if,
will be cut off here.
but what if you wanted them to die?
Well, that's tricky to answer. Now,
He's like,
if
they
God
should
if God actually says this person's so guilty, I do want them dead, and this has happened. It's not just a rare occurrence. It does happen several times in the Bible. Where God says, hey, that person's super guilty. I need them to be put to death. They have committed too many crimes. Their punishment is now death. He puts someone in charge of that. Now, what changes in that equation is the person doing the killing is not going and hunting them down because they hate them. They're not murdering anymore. There is a killing going on. Someone dies,
So he
but that's not murder anymore. That's the same as the person who is sentencing someone to death. If God says the punishment for murder is death, unless you can find a way around murder, then the person who puts them to death is a murderer too, and you create this infinite chain reaction of murder, murder, murder. But that's not how it works. The person who's part of the government, the person who's in charge, the person who is tasked with putting a murderer to death is not in fact a murderer. They're just following the law. They're an executioner. That's why we have that special word, execute. It means to carry out a legal order. It doesn't mean to put someone to death. Isn't that weird? You can execute all kinds of orders. Your commanding officer could say, move that stack of boxes to that stack of, or to that empty space over there. You can execute the order by carrying the boxes over to that place. Execute just means you did the thing you were told to do. This is why we call an executioner an executioner. Their job is not killing. Their job is not murder. Their job is to carry out the lawful order they were given. Crazy, right? All right, now think about this. If we take away the death penalty, get rid of it, then what punishment is there that can equal murder?
Killing.
What punishment could you bestow upon a murderer that would be equal to their crimes? Okay, think about what life in prison is.
Life in hell.
It's, you get to live, but not the life you want to live.
Well,
Is that the kind of crime they committed? Did they forcibly change someone's life but allow them to keep living?
no.
Not really.
Life in hell.
So this is the problem. If you change the punishment for murder away from the death penalty, you become unjust in the process. You take away the balance of the crime and the punishment. Now, you can do that if you're God, and you can find a way to still punish, to still enact justice. God did this by putting the punishment on Jesus. But we as humans don't have that ability to put the punishment rightfully on someone else. God did that once and for all. God can forgive sins, even murder, through what Jesus did on the cross. That's amazing. He had to die. God, the Son, had to die to make it possible. For him to be able to forgive even a murderer, he had to be killed. So he took on the punishment that the murderer was owed. Does that make sense? That's a wild thing. That's not something you or I could do. To take their punishment would be to be killed. You wouldn't be there to forgive them. It's not a system that works. You would have to be God to make that work. Yeah. You're going with a hand in the room.
Oh yeah, sorry. So but like, what if you accidentally, like out of anger, you're angry, but you're angry, but you don't mean to kill someone, but you kill
This happens a lot. You're on
Because
like a
you're
hiking trail, you get into an argument, you push them because you're angry, and they fall down and down and down and
Or
down
like,
and down.
I'm thinking of like a car, like you hit someone.
Out of anger with a car?
Yeah.
I really want
Maybe pick a smaller object and this works.
I really want to hit
Okay,
someone.
like maybe a smaller object. All right. No. This actually does happen. This happens a lot. A lot of deaths happen because someone hit someone harder than they meant to
The
hit them.
dude doesn't stop.
Wait,
Cars don't really count. Okay.
so they meant
I meant to hit him at 5 miles an hour, but accidentally there was a 0 on the speedometer. I was going 50. It's not like that usually. Usually it's like I hit them with the nearest object my hand could pick up. I was in a rage and I grabbed a thing and hit them with it. And the thing turned out to be like
A knife.
a bit heavy and they died. You guys laugh. That's a real circumstance that happens all the time.
Yeah.
And what happens there is a judge actually has to decide. A judge actually has to decide. And typically the discerning factor in our court systems is whether or not they went into the situation with hatred or they found hatred while they were in the situation. Was it premeditated? I'm gonna go angry and yell and argue with that person. I hunt them down to argue with them, and then I accidentally pick up an object and I accidentally hit them. That doesn't make any sense. You hunted them down, you confronted them in anger. The opposite could be true though. You bumped into that person or they hunted you down, and the argument got so angry, so intense, that then you just couldn't take it anymore. Then the judge could say, well, you weren't trying to find them. You weren't trying to confront them. They found you. You just bumped into them. So we'll call this manslaughter. This is what our legal system has come up with as a notch down from murder. That you did knowingly kill them, but you didn't intend to before you did it.
Okay.
And that's like super gray area where our legal system has invented extra notches on the scale that weren't in God's word.
Okay.
So God has a definition for manslaughter, and it is completely accidental. Our legal system has created some gray areas in the middle.
Okay, and the other question. Like how people can have a whole life in prison, right?
Sure.
But is that usually not from like killing someone? It's usually from doing other things.
Other crimes typically, yeah.
But then that should be switched. You should have life in prison for killing someone, and other than that, have like 15 years or something instead of life in prison.
Well, like we talked about, short of the death sentence, nothing else actually equals the crime of murder. It's still a punishment. It's still a deterrent. But God said it because it's an equal measure of punishment. You take a life is taken. So, and he said that's the same even for an animal. Even if an animal kills a person, their life, it's got to go. Keep it equal. Now, why? Why is this important? It's the same thing about the don't eat a piece of meat with blood on it. He's trying to establish a respect for life. He wants people to understand that life is something that he gives, God gives it, and so it is something that should never be taken away lightly. It should never be taken away lightly. Yes, as a punishment for a crime of taking away life, life can be taken away. Yes, to eat the animal and stay alive, you can take the animal's life. Does that make sense? You're sustaining your life by taking the animal's life. You are staying alive by eating them. So God's not saying killing may never happen, may never exist. He's saying life is special. It's sacred. It's important. It should never be taken as something that's just kind of to throw away. Who cares? It should always be sacred. All right, we'll move on one more step. Remember, all of this is about respect so far. All of it's about respect so far. Okay. Your turn to read.
And God told Noah and his sons, I hereby confirm my covenant with you and your descendants, and with all the animals that were on the boat with you, birds, livestock, and all the wild animals. Everything living creature on earth, yes, I am confirming my covenant with you. Never again will flood waters kill all living creatures, never again will flood destroy the earth.
And so God is actually making a covenant here for several reasons. One of them is just like so people don't freak out the next time it rains. Because before the flood, it had never rained. After the flood, it's going to rain just like it does now, whenever the weather feels like it. And if it's never rained until it floods the entire planet, the next time it rains is going to be pretty scary season. Because that'll be the second time it ever rained. And the first time was not so fun. So he puts into nature a repeating promise of a rainbow. Now, I don't know if you guys understand how the rainbow thing works, but the sun and the moisture in the air creates the rainbow. And so anytime the sun's up and the rain stops, there's a rainbow. You have to be standing physically in the right place to see it. It's not in every direction. But from a certain direction, there is always a rainbow if the sun is up and the rain is ending. Wherever the light goes through the mist left over from the rain, there will be a rainbow. So if you're not standing in the right spot, you might not see it, but it's always there. It's really cool. It's kind of like a flashlight is directional. Rainbows are directional. You have to be in the right place. So he puts this reminder there, but then check out what he's doing. He's promising to never destroy all life. This was it. So remember, he tried to get them to respect the life of animals. He tried to get them to respect the life of each other. And now he's showing respect even for their lives. God, the one who created them, God, the one who has all power, all control, could kill them whenever he feels like it would be fine. He's showing respect for life. And so this is the chain we see so far, is respect, respect, respect. And then we get to Jediah.
Then God said, I am giving you a sign of my covenant with you. And with all living creatures, for all generations to come. I have placed my rainbow in your hearts. It is a sign of my covenant with you and with all living creatures.
So here we see the phrase all generations. Last verse we read a second ago from Caleb, it said eternal, an eternal covenant. Yeah, Jonathan.
So leprechauns don't exist?
No, sorry, they don't. All right, guys, so eternal. There is actually going to be another event where everything on the earth dies. Does anyone know when that is, what that is? Anyone? It won't be a flood. He promised it won't
It'll
be
be
a flood.
fire.
It'll be fire the next time. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The devil.
Not the devil. The devil is not fire.
Wait, what?
He's just an angel who's fallen. Like,
And
he's
he
not,
turns into fire.
no, there's no fire devil relationship. Like it's
He
just
can turn into fire.
no. Why would that be a thing?
Because
Yeah,
he'd be
water,
so
fire.
angry,
He
he'd
turns
turn
into fire.
into
Then
fire.
kill everyone.
All right. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? No one. No one gets it. No one knows what I'm talking about. Yeah.
When he sneezes, he'd be eternal fire.
Weston, close your mouth. Sorry, Cameron. Did you have something to add? Oh, okay. It comes from Revelation. Revelation is the last book in the Bible, and it talks about what's going to happen at the end of this world as we know it. When God ends this existence and starts up the eternal existence of heaven, as we read about so often in the Bible, being everlasting, going on forever and ever and ever. He talks about recreating the earth to be heaven, to bring heaven down, wipe the earth clean, and start it over fresh and new and perfect. And when he wipes it clean, the thing he uses to wipe it clean is fire. That's what we read about in Revelation. So he promises here we will never have another flood that destroys everything with water. But there will be a time when he destroys everything again, one more time, but it'll be with fire. Now what's cool about that is last week the opening to this whole covenant was that in the in-between, from the flood to the fire, in the in-between, there will never be an end to the hot and the cold, the winter and the summer, the planting and the harvest. There will be no cease of those things. So between the flood and the fire, the earth's going to keep on going on. And that's a really cool promise when you start to think about all the ways we could possibly botch this. Like, releasing noxious gases into the atmosphere, nuclear war, giant asteroids striking the earth, tsunamis and typhoons and hurricanes destroying everything. All these things that seem scary, and it's like, oh, that could destroy everything. God's basically promised not everything. Maybe we'll get crazy enough and launch a bunch of nukes and kill a bunch of people, but we won't kill everyone. Maybe the earth will get so poisoned with pollution it'll be really hard to farm, but we'll still be able to. God said there's still going to be harvest after the planting. There's still going to be summer after the winter. There's still going to be hot after the cold. So no matter how bad we might make it, we're still going to make it until God says it's the end. When he finally says, all right, we're done now. It's time for heaven on earth. Up until that point, we're not going to be able to end it. All right, got a few hands. Cameron first.
Okay, so I just thought of something. I have a theory. So you said that God is going to fire. Okay.
He said he's going to.
Okay. With all these fires happening, in Son, one's happening in Orville.
Maybe this is like the pilot light on the stove. You ever have a gas stove? It's like a little giant still
I have a barbecue, not a gas stove.
No, I'm pretty sure wildfires have been going on for the whole 6,000 years ever since creation. Wildfires just happen. Yeah.
We're gonna die by fire. Or we won't be alive by then.
Yes, no. Okay, so if you go through the timeline of Revelation, when he destroys the earth, we're not in physical bodies anymore anyways. We have our spiritual heavenly bodies now. So he's not killing all the people when he does that. He's wiping the earth clean. And yeah, I'm sure some animals are going to die in that, but he recreates animals anyways. So we aren't dying in that fire. At that point, everyone is already sent to their respective end locations, either to eternal hell or eternal heaven. Then he's recreating everything in fire. So it's not like the method of killing the people is fire. It's the method of starting the planet over. Does that make sense? So you gotta read the timeline of Revelation. The fire comes like way at the end. Yeah.
So if heaven is eternal,
Yep.
how do you not get bored? Like,
How do you get bored here and now?
just nothing to do.
Okay. Because you have a limited number of things to do. If heaven is infinite, you have an infinite number of things to do.
So I can play this one.
How could you get bored?
I can play
So, like, it's kind of like really hard to think about because
You would also have a perfected consciousness. Like, you're not going to have your limited earth brain.
You wouldn't be sad.
Yeah, that too.
Nice.
Does that make sense? Like, everything is perfected. And infinite.
so like there won't be any like sleeping pregnancy.
I don't know about sleeping. Sleeping's what I've thought about, and I don't really know the answer. Like, I don't know if you need to sleep, but I don't know if that means you can't. Just because you don't need to. Like, you wouldn't need to eat in a perfect world, but yet the Bible talks about eating in heaven, so obviously you can. So, like, maybe you could sleep if you wanted to.
So like you could like climb a tree and like jump off and won't get hurt.
Yeah, because you can fly.
So you can fly.
Yeah, you can fly.
I'm a Superman.
Alright. Move on. Your turn? Go for it. Isn't it neat God picked a beautiful sign and not just like, I don't know.
When you see clouds and there's rain, remember, I'm not going to flood the earth again.
I guess he could have done that. Rain could have been the reminder. We always see the rain. He picked a rainbow. I think that's pretty cool. He made it a beautiful promise. I'm not going to do this again. Beautiful. All right, just remember that next time you see a rainbow. It's a good thing to think about. Okay. Then we get to the weird stuff. We're starting in on the weird stuff. It's gonna get real weird today. Alrighty. Ayla, would you read
Hey,
this
what
one?
about me?
You can read the next one.
Oh, sweet. The sons of Noah who came out of the boat were Shem, Ham, and
Japheth.
Ham is the father of Canaan. From these three sons of Noah came all the people who now populate the earth.
Now the reason we see Canaan singled out here, because like none of the other guys' sons get mentioned, is because Canaan, that's the family that eventually settles in the promised land where the Israelites end up. But the Israelites weren't descended from Canaan. So that's the weird part. So Canaan from Ham settles in this central location in the Middle East. It's really close to where the Ark landed. It's really close to where the Garden of Eden likely was. Like this is a very, very, very central place. This is where they settle. And they're called out because this book that we're reading, Genesis, is written by and to the people who eventually end up here. I mean, think about it. This book is written by Moses while the people of Israel are traveling to this location, the land of Canaan. He is writing the book on the way to that spot. So when there's, 10 to 20 different sons of these three guys, he doesn't mention every single one. He mentions the one where they're going. Does that make sense? It's not just a random story of all time, of all history, of everything that's ever happened. It's an intentional story that's telling the story of how did we get here? Written by the people who were here. Does that make sense? How did we get here? So Moses, the guy writing this, pulls Canaan out and mentions him in the story. And now he's going to mention him again. And it's going to get like just a little bit weirder, just a notch weirder. Ready for this? All right, go for it.
After the flood, Noah began to cultivate the ground, and he planted a vineyard. One day he drank some wine he made, and became drunk and lay naked inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw that his father was naked and went outside and told his brothers.
Okay, so this is pretty weird, but realize what's going on here. If you are in your tent and you are naked, and someone can see that, what else did you do that is not in this paragraph? You left the door open. Now, if you go camping, at some point you've got to change your clothes. You're going to stink if you don't. You've got to take your clothes off in your tent and get changed. But you shut the door first.
There is no door.
Right? You shut the door. This is totally normal to go in your own tent and get undressed, but you shut the door, except he got drunk first. He's drunk enough he didn't remember the door. And then he passes out. So he forgets step number one, and then before he gets whatever clothes on he was going to change into, he falls asleep. He just passes out drunk on the ground. So now, yes.
But is he naked when he passes out?
That's the point. Drunk, laying in his tent, naked. Not a great time. Not a great time. Now, remember, the whole setup for this, right before God has Moses stick this part in, is all about respect, respect, respect. And then we see Noah, the one guy chosen off the whole planet who loved God and was good, was righteous. The one guy on the whole planet, okay, gets drunk enough to pass out naked in his tent with the door open. Which tells you a few things. Okay? Even really good godly people make mistakes. I don't know if you know, but being drunk is a sin. God says you can drink wine, you can drink alcohol, but don't get drunk. And the reason we don't let kids drink alcohol generally is because you guys can get drunk off of like a quarter of a drink. Like you don't even have to drink the whole drink. Your bodies, your blood amount, your liver's too small. Like you're not built for handling alcohol.
Thank you, small liver.
Yeah, so don't give kids alcohol. Their bodies can't handle it yet. The older you get, the bigger your liver gets, the more blood you have in your body, the more alcohol can enter your system before you get drunk.
I didn't think to ask.
So Moses, sorry, wrong guy. So Noah should not be getting drunk in the first place, okay? But once you get drunk, your ability to make decisions is severely diminished. Now we know how drunk he is because he passed out. There's actually a physiological amount of alcohol in your system that will make you able to just pass out. So from the fact that he passed out, we can deduce how drunk he is. This is 3/4 of the way to death. When you get to the point of pass out, you are 3/4 of the way to dying. And this is a self-defense mechanism, essentially. Your body has 4 major parts of the brain that experience drunkenness. And if you get to the 4th one, you die. That's your brainstem. If your brainstem gets saturated in alcohol, your heart stops being told to beat, your lungs stop being told to breathe, your digestive tract stops being told to digest. Your brainstem does all those background jobs that keep you living. And so your brain is set up with stages of filters. You start getting your careful decision making taken away. Then you start getting your ability to think about concepts and ideas taken away. Then you start getting your ability to stay like alert enough to be awake taken away. And then you start losing your ability to breathe and beat your heart and digest food. So if you're passed out drunk, you're pretty drunk. You must have had quite a bit too much. Quite a bit too much. All right, so now this is where it gets crucial. You guys catch this part. What did he do after he saw his dad drunk? What could he have done so much easier? Now that would be hard. Dressing a sleeping person, dressing a sleeping person, that's hard. You could do that. That's much easier. Close the door. So easy.
He just leaves the door.
Dad made a mistake. He's passed out drunk. Shut the door. That's it. Now, tent doors don't work the same as our doors, right? But I don't know the construction of their tent. It could have been like pull the drawstring and the door shuts itself. It could have been like pull the fabric over and like put the little toggles through the little loops. I don't know. It could have literally been like pull the sticks out that hold the canopy up and the canopy falls down in front of it. I don't know. But it's easier to shut a tent door usually than open a tent door. It's not hard. And that would have been the respectful thing to do. Because at this point, we don't know what else is going on. He could have like spilled wine next to him and you can tell why he's asleep. Or maybe the wine's way back at the vineyard and we have no idea why he's asleep. You could do all kinds of things. Maybe check if he's alive. Like all kinds of things that would be respectful responses, and yet that's not what he does. He goes and spreads it. This is like gossip. Instead of fixing the problem or helping with the problem, he just gossips about the problem. Not great. All right, now there's another Hebrew thing in this verse, but we'll come back to it after we read the next set of verses. Matt, you can read this one. Japheth. So now they go a step further than just shut the door. They do something that's nice for a sleeping person. You cover them up. I mean, even if someone's wearing clothes, if they fall asleep on the couch, that's like the nurturing, loving thing to do is go find a blanket and cover them up so that they can actually get some good rest from their sleep. Being warm helps you to have that comfy, restful feeling. And so they do something nice, and they do it in a respectful way. They go in backwards. It's like an extra step you don't even need to take. You don't have to do that, but they did that too. That's really cool. Now, there's a few things at play here. First off, Shem and Japheth are the older brothers. Ham's the youngest. Also, back in this sentence, it says in the Hebrew, Ham, father, Canaan. That's all it says. It doesn't say the and up. We add those words in English because we don't talk like that. But in Hebrew, it just says Ham, father, Canaan. That's all it says. Then we get into the next verse, 24 through 25, and we see Noah wake up. That's you.
When Noah woke up from his stupor, he learned that Ham was in the son of death. the curse Canaan, the son of Ham. Now Canaan was cursed. Made he the lowest of servants to his relatives.
Now, what the heck just happened? It seems like once Noah is sober, he finds out what happens, what Ham did, and then punishes Canaan. I mean, in English, it's plain as day, Noah punished the wrong guy. Right? I mean, Ham's the one who was gossiping, and yet Canaan's the one getting punished. What went wrong here? Yeah.
Maybe Canaan is.
Ooh! You're sadly not that far from the truth. Check this out. In the original Hebrew, this word Ham is not in the sentence. It literally says his youngest male relative. That's what it says. Youngest male relative. The word for son here is not specific to a son. It could be your son, your grandson, your nephew, like literally any male relative. And the word youngest is an emphatic youngest. And as far as we know from the family tree, Canaan is the youngest son of Ham, who is the youngest son of Noah. So the youngest living male in this family tree is Canaan. And this sentence doesn't name Ham. It says Noah learned what his youngest male relative had done. So he punished Canaan, who is his youngest male relative. This makes you go back and question the only other time that Ham is actually named. Because here, Ham is named, finally, as the father of Canaan. Not as the culprit, just as being the father. You go back to the original verse, and the original verse doesn't say the and of, it just says Ham, father Canaan. That could just as easily, in the Hebrew, which is literally written backwards, be Ham's son Canaan? Or Canaan who has the father of Ham, like it was in the latter verse, Canaan whose father is Ham. So it's a little twisty, but it's very possible Ham isn't actually the guy doing any of this stuff right here. That it's actually Canaan who's doing this stuff, and Noah did curse the right guy. It seems more likely than the Bible saying he woke from his stupor and yet he acts in a drunken way. Because naming the wrong guy is kind of drunken. Yeah, Kilo.
What if they just called him Ham?
That'd be weird. That'd
Nickname.
just a nickname, call you by your dad's name. That's like extra confusing, not less confusing. Yeah, Weston.
So in a couple of stories back when the culprit
Sure.
had discovered that Noah was running naked, didn't he say he went out and told his brothers?
Again, Hebrew, it's the word for male relatives. It's translated as brothers because they thought it was Ham, and therefore the relationship between Ham and Japheth and Shem is as brothers. So you would translate the word for male relative to brothers so that it's easier to read in English.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, Hebrew is really hard to translate into English because we speak so differently than they spoke. So literally the word for brothers is the same word for son because it's really just the word for male relative. But no one in English ever says the phrase male relative. Like that's not something we do. We always add as much specificity as we possibly can and try to be specific in English. That's how we talk. So you wouldn't say my male relative when you mean brother, you just say brother. But that's English, this is Hebrew, they're different. Noah keeps going though, he doesn't just have things to say about Canaan, he's going to bring the rest of the family into it too. Honey? Or Peach? My brain, I'm sorry. Go for it.
And also, may the Lord, the God of
Shem.
be blessed. And may Canaan be his name's God.
Expand.
And
Its territory. Japheth. I know, I gave you the one with like all the big words.
Japheth, Shem,
Prosperity.
and then be his
Nicely done. Thank you for trying. That was a lot of hard words. All right, so he pronounces not only the curse on Canaan, but also a blessing on Shem and Japheth. And this is interesting that Noah, a guy who loved God and God loved Noah, and Noah was a great guy, made a big mistake. Okay, he got so drunk that he did things he shouldn't have done. That's a big mistake. But when he's done with that and he wakes up from that, the things he says, these aren't just like angry curses shouting at people who are not nice to him. Guys, these things come true. These things come true. For generations, this remains true. So these words he's speaking become prophecy. That's wild. Even though this is immediately after, I mean, hours ago, he was lying naked and drunk in his tent with the door open. Now he's prophesying. That's crazy. This tells me a few things again. That even if you make a huge mistake, God doesn't immediately run and abandon you. He doesn't immediately just kick you out and say, I'm not working with you anymore. I'm done with you. You made a mistake. Get out of here. Like, Noah's words are prophecy at this point, and this is immediately after what he did wrong. Did you have something to add?
Oh, no, I was wondering, it says, may the Lord be blessed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you're saying that he blesses Shem.
Well, yes, not in those exact words right there. Okay, it's down here. May God expand the territory of Japheth, and may Japheth share the prosperity of Shem, implying that Shem will be prosperous.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
okay.
So it's a blessing on Japheth here, and then it's an implied blessing on Shem, and this is a blessing on Shem of a completely different sort. It's the Lord, the God of Shem, be blessed. How would you bless the God of Shem? By Shem being able to do so. Because otherwise he would just say God. He would just say, may God be blessed. But he goes so far as to say the God of Shem. So this is implying a relationship between God and Shem. So if God's going to be blessed, then that's like by the sacrifices, by the love, by the respect, the obedience, the faith of the family of Shem. So they're going to bless God, but that's because their life is already blessed. Okay, so we have all this extra cool prophecy stuff, and then we get to like a little factual, just the nitty gritty sum up. And that makes it your turn. Congrats!
Noah lived another 350 years after the Great Flood. He lived 950 years and then he died.
All right, now we know from this age right here, and that we're pretty sure his sons lived past the day when he died. That would mean that Shem, whose eventual descendant is Abraham, some 350-ish years later, Shem would have actually been able to meet Abraham. Shem would have still been alive at the time of Abraham. Noah would have almost made it. So Abraham could have easily met Abraham's dad. That's pretty cool, even though there's hundreds of years involved and many generations in between. You couldn't just be alive to meet your grandparents or your great-grandparents. At this point in time, you could have been alive to meet your great-great-great-great-grandparents. That's really cool. So the story of the flood would not have died out. The story of the flood would not have just disappeared and everyone forgot about it, because the guy who built the boat was still alive for multiple generations after the flood. That's really cool. All right, now we're going to do chapter 10. We're going to do it like lightning speed round. We're going to sum it up, because if you glance in your Bibles at chapter 10, you will find it is just a big old stack of names and places. Big old stack of names and places. And if you guys are stumbling over the pronunciation of every single name and you've never even heard of any of the places, you're going to read it and go, I don't know what any of that means. So we're going to do it graphically. We're going to do it visually. So someone needs to read me the first verse, and then we'll move to the graphics.
First verse right there?
Yep, that's the one.
Okay.
Extra big.
This is the account of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the 3 sons of Noah. Many children were born to them after the great flood.
Okay, so after the Great Flood, this is a period of time that spans hundreds of years. And so some of the stuff in chapter 10 is not happening like the day after chapter 9. Some of the stuff in chapter 10 is like way out there. And in fact, there's stories in 11, the Tower of Babel, that happen in the middle of chapter 10. They're just giving you like the big picture view of like all the descendants way down the family tree. So chapter 10 goes really far forward in time. It is not written as this little slice. It is written as like everything that's coming for a few hundred years. So the first section in chapter 10 is the descendants of Japheth. Okay, so descendants of Japheth are named, and then the places are given, and all of the places are up from the area known as the Middle East. They all are moving up north, and they go both ways. They go northwest, they go northeast, they go basically north. Japheth's name in Hebrew actually comes from the same root words as they use for lightness or whiteness, paleness. And so these people groups moving up into here, we see historically, are the lighter skinned people groups. If you guys can see through the purple, you can see this is Europe over here. You got like the boot of Italy, little sticky outy part that's Spain, UK's up over there. There's Greece, there's like Turkey, and then over here you've got Russia, Korea's over there. And then you've got the next part of the chapter, after you get past chapter 5, down to chapters 6 through 20, you have the descendants of Ham. And Ham comes from, not the root word, like it is the word for darkness or black. It's literally the word Ham in the Hebrew. So they all move in this direction. But there is some overlap, and we'll get to this triangle towards the end of the chapter, because this triangle is basically where there is the exception to all of the rules I'm laying out. Like they went north, they went, off in the southern direction down here. The triangle is the exception. The triangle is where everyone just kind of, it's all mixed up. Anyway, so Ham moves off in these directions. We find his descendants being named. Some of them we actually know specifically which countries came from them. Countries like Ethiopia, Egypt. We actually know which descendant of Ham they came from. The Canaanites, we know which one they came from. Canaan. And then at the very end, we get Shem. And this isn't an age order. He's doing this thematically rather than in like a who's the oldest type order. And so then you get to Shem. Shem moves off in this easterly direction, and a lot of them stay in the Middle East as well. And his name literally means dusky or a medium color. Dusk is when you're between the night and the day. So Shem means dusky, medium. And this is actually what we find in the DNA record as you go through the people of the earth and you collect DNA from all these different races and people groups. Scientists, even non-Christian ones, have figured out that within the DNA you can trace a picture of the giant, ridiculous family tree of all the earth. You can create a model of the entire Earth's family tree out of the DNA. And it doesn't show you like father, son, father, son, father, son. Interestingly, it shows you mother, daughter, mother, daughter, mother, daughter. In our DNA, the father's DNA is very mishmashed in. A lot of extra mutations come through on that side. In the mother's DNA, there's a special section set aside that every girl inherits perfect copies of. There's no change in that DNA. You get it from your mom if you're a girl, and it's a perfect copy of that section of your mom's DNA. There's no mixing on that one. And so if you look specifically at women's DNA and you just hone in on that piece, you can see which piece they got from their mom. And then you can start to make some deductions. If they got this part from their mom, then that tells us a lot about their mom. And then we can make guesses about what that mom got from her mom, and what that mom got from her mom, and what that mom got from her mom. The rest of the DNA for the girls is a mix of the guys, the moms and the dad's DNA. And for guys, it's all a mix. It's just a complete mix. So ours isn't really good at making trees out of. It's really hard to make a chain reaction link graph from guys' DNA. But from that, this is what's so funny to me. They linked every human on the planet to a 3-branch tree. Scientifically linked all of us to a 3-branch tree. A tree that has one major trunk, and at some point in history broke off in 3 distinct directions.
Is that
interesting?
Shem?
Not exactly. You're so close. Think about what I said. It's only the women's DNA that links this way.
Their wives.
It's the 3 wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Why? Well, because Shem, Ham, and Japheth were brothers. Their DNA would not be that different. They all had the same mom and the same dad. That's not that different. I mean, there's differences between brothers, but not a huge difference. But the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth came from 3 completely different families. So their DNA would be totally distinct. And so if you trace mom DNA to mom DNA to mom DNA all the way back, you should end up at a three-prong fork in the road. And that links up to those 3 women. Isn't that cool? Totally proven by science, has nothing to do with the Bible. It's just a totally outside fact that we figured out through DNA linkage. And it happens to coincide with exactly what the Bible tells us. Now, after this point in time, because this is a point in time when it says these three people groups spread in three major directions, okay? This is not going to last forever. There's going to be borders, there's going to be countries, there's going to be migrations, there's going to be changes, there's going to be wars. And so eventually, these people groups are not distinct. They don't stay separate. Shem's family doesn't say only Shem's family, okay? Japheth's family doesn't say only Japheth's family. Ham's family does not say only Ham's family. But they start out that way, and then things start to change. Everything gets mishmashed over time. So you have three distinct types of DNA, but then blending occurs, marriages occur that are across these family lines, and slowly but surely you get new races that aren't these three. You get new skin colors, you get new, facial symmetry, you get new skull shapes, you get new jaw lines, you get new things from the blending of these three families. But what we see in humanity is really interesting. If you look at those features, you can actually trace them back. Things like skin tone, things like the shape of our skull, they trace back to these initial families. And now this triangle, we have to get to the end part here. The triangle, I forgot to fix it. This triangle is the mishmash zone. And so in this zone, some of Shem's family is up here, where Japheth's family mostly is. Some of Ham's family is up here, especially in Canaan, down here along the coastline. Some of Japheth's family is down south and below the border, but mostly inside of this big triangle. That's the mishmash zone where people kind of moved around more than they did past that area. And then inside this tinier triangle, that's the promised land. That's the land of Canaan. That's the area that God says one day to the Israelites, I want you to have it. This is the land that is originally taken over by the Canaanites, the descendants of Canaan. And so when Noah made that proclamation, he said, you will always serve your brothers. You will be below them. He says that, and then one day it happens. Descendants of Shem, the Israelites, are told by God, go take this land. I've set it aside for you. You will take it from the descendants of Canaan. It will be yours. Yeah.
Where is Ur?
Ur would be north and over from Israel. And so this is part of the mishmash zone. It's basically where Babylon eventually pops up. It's in that area. It's called the Chaldees. It's like a series of mountains called the Chaldees. Yeah.
So what about for the Americas?
Good question. That one is hotly contested. Shortly after the flood, we get the Ice Age, and there would be a lowering of the oceans in proportion to the amount of extra ice we get. So the ability to cross to America wouldn't actually have had to be done by boat back then. You could walk over. You know, on the map, there's that big strip of Alaska that points towards Russia. You lower the ocean the amount you would during an ice age, it'd just be a big giant peninsula. You could just walk across it. Be pretty cool. So some people think it's the descendants of Japheth. Some people think it's the descendants of Shem. It could be a crossover of the two. We see the best link up for skin tone in Native Americans is actually a mixture or something like the skin tones you see in Pacific Islanders or the skin tones you see in the people of India. What's the original name? Like Inda? Well, like before it was India, there was like a name for the people. But anyways, I'm messing it up. You guys can look it up later. But those are the closest skin tone matches we find. And then as far as like the skull shape, it's more like India, less like Pacific Islanders, depending on which part of America you look at. If you look more north, they're and like in South America, it's more like Pacific Islanders, and in the middle, central, well, what we call North America, USA, it's more like the skeleton of India. So whatever group it was, Shem or Japheth, that was in that like India, Philippines area, they're probably the ones that kept going. Like we were already going east, let's just go further east, and they eventually end up in the States. So, but yeah, likely during the Ice Age, that's like the 350 to 450 years following the flood. It's a long stretch of time, plenty of time to make it over to the States. So, but then eventually, Ice Age ends, oceans come back up, peninsula cut off. Until the boats to cross an ocean get invented, they're stuck over there. Separate people groups, separate cultures, totally distinct. So, But eventually you get to periods of time where certain Pacific Islanders and the Chinese actually find ways to get to America. It's one of the weird things we dug up archaeologically in California was Chinese relics from before the USA was a country. Like back in the Native American days, there were actually Chinese things left on our west coast. Weird, right? Strange pieces of history.
No, at first I thought it was the Vikings that landed on America.
Well, and knew what it was. There's no like records of the written sort about why the Chinese came here or what they did when they got here. We just find their stuff because like paper doesn't last that long. We're talking before the days of Leif Erikson, hundreds of years before. It's like we don't find any written things.
Before China imported crappy stuff.
Well, however you want to look at that, yeah, way before that. Okay, this is it though. This is the last verse. Your turn. Go for it, Hunter.
These are the clans that descended from Noah's sons, arranged by nation according to their lines of descent. All the nations of the earth descended from these clans after the great flood.
And remember, this chapter, we're spending a bunch of time. Next week, we're going to zoom back in to a few generations after the flood. Just a short while after the flood, we get to look at the Tower of Babel next week.
Yay.
All right, now, what did this whole series of chapters 9 and 10, what did they all have in common? What was the theme we saw running through 9?
Nothing.
Nothing. Good. Glad you're paying attention. What was it? He knew it. Hunter.
I was gonna say that.
Wow.
Didn't actually just one word.
All right, so
Wait, respect?
do you think there's anything to learn about respect in? Do you guys think there's anything to learn about respect in chapter 10?
No. Okay.
No.
You can guess. You don't have to know the answer.
Absolutely not.
Think of it like this, guys. We saw in chapter 9 disrespect formed consequences that would last generations. That at the head, at the leadership of what would one day be a country, Canaan's family, there was disrespect, and it bore a consequence. This is the same in nations today. When a nation respects God, there is a consequence, but it's a good consequence. And when a nation disrespects God, there is a consequence, except you get it, it'll be a negative consequence. And so it was true back then, it's true today. If you, as a junior higher, disrespect your elders, your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, whoever's in charge of you, there will be a negative consequence. If you respect your elders, there will be a positive consequence. This is something you can glean from both of these chapters, that the consequences are not always small. Sometimes something seemingly not that big a deal. I'll just go gossip a little. Grandpa did something really dumb. It had a big consequence. It echoed through the generations and affected his children's 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 children. That's huge. Now, you won't live to know what your consequence echoes into, but what you do now at this age, the amount of respect you afford your elders, even, I might add, according to chapter 9, when they don't deserve it. When you give them respect, even if they don't deserve it, you do something that goes way beyond them and way beyond you. You honor God in the process. This is huge. You see, gossiping about your grandpa when your grandpa actually did do something wrong is still wrong. Even if they did something wrong.
What if gossiping about him if he did something right?
Is that gossip?
Well,
Yes.
because gossip is talking.
I think we might have to redefine gossip.
Because that's talking about someone behind their back. Don't steal my wallet.
Okay. Let me put it to you like this. We have a separate word for that, and it makes me think that gossip doesn't include that. Okay. We have a word for talking someone up even when they're not there. It's gets used by Paul a lot in the New Testament. I can think of it. If anyone thinks of it, shout it out. Anyways, talking people up in their presence or when they're not there is good. It's a good thing. So no, I don't think you could gossip about a good thing. That wouldn't really be gossip. It would be something else entirely. All right. Wind this back up. When you guys get the opportunity to respect an elder, whether or not they've earned it, You honor God in the process, and he rewards that. He rewards that. That's what we got to see from Shem and Japheth. They go in, they go above and beyond. They don't just shut the door and wait to see what happens. They cover him up, let him sleep comfy. They were respectful. And then they're blessed because of it. The same curse that falls on Canaan is the opposite for them. The curse on Canaan was to be lesser and lower. The blessing on them was to be prosperous and above. So the exact thing, but reversed. And this is the whole point. You strengthen your relationship with God, you strengthen your relationship with your elders when you respect them. This is a good thing. This will come back on you with good consequences. It will have a good effect. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word. Thank you that we get to look into it, even thousands of years into the past, so we can see your truth right at the beginning of things. Help us, Lord, to take that respect for life that you've asked for and to have it, to show it. To not treat animals with cruelty, but give them proper respect. To understand that their life is keeping us alive when we eat them. To understand that life is something that you grant, and it's not something that we should look on lightly. That murder isn't just wrong because we said so, Lord. It's wrong because you said so. And that we are taking away control of life from you. Help us, Lord, to respect not only life, but our elders too. To have that respect even when it's hard. When they're doing something wrong, Lord, help us to be respectful. When they're doing something right, help us to be respectful. When it's easy, help us to be respectful. When it's hard, help us to be respectful. That would help us, because that is one of the hardest things we can ever try to do as people who are younger than someone else. Help us, Lord, to make that important in our lives like you would have it be. And to grow closer to our elders and closer to you in the process. With our heads bowed, with our eyes closed, if there's anyone here this morning, maybe you're sitting here and you realize you're not close to God right now, but you want to be close to God. If that's you, if you want to grow close to him, there's a first step. You've got to be forgiven. You've got to have your slate wiped clean, all your sin taken away. God says he wants to do that for each and every one of us. But to make it fair, to make it just like murder demanded in our story today, the proper and equal punishment. There is a punishment that we all deserve for the things we do wrong. It's separation from God. Permanent separation. And God didn't want that for any of us, and so he made a way through his son, Jesus, coming to the earth, taking punishment on himself in our place. He deserved none of it, but he took it so that God could give you mercy instead. God could give you forgiveness instead. So if you want to take hold of that right now, you want to say, forgive me, God, please. I want to be close to you, not separated. I want to have a relationship with you. You can do that right now. If you'd like to, just raise your hand. God sees your heart. He knows what you're thinking. He knows what you're going to do right now. I can't, though. So if you raise your hand, I'll get to see that you want to start that relationship with God. You want to ask for forgiveness. And I'll pray with you. I'll help you out. You can talk to God. You can ask him for forgiveness. You can start that relationship right now. Anyone this morning? We love you, Lord. Thank you for these junior hires. Bless them as they go. Help them to respect their elders today, to practice that, to honor you in the process. We ask all this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Amen. I love you guys. Put your Bibles on the shelf. I will see you all next week. If you got any more questions, hang out, talk, ask them. I like questions.
So big.
Like by a mile, too. Yes, very likely. We do a phone bucket at the end. If your phone comes out last, you guys
Wait, who won phone bucket?
Caleb. By a landslide. Like his was sticking to the bottom while everyone else saw it.
Most likely grab super glue and glued it.
Me.
Like grab
Daniel. Was it Steve? the word esteem?
Oh my goodness.
You're not thinking
Question.
To build up something. I just couldn't think of one word.
I couldn't take notes fast enough. Oh my gosh, you're such a good teacher. Thanks, honey.
I wish I could just keep it under on time.
Oh, you did a good job.
Okay.